Calder Willingham, the author of the book and play upon which this film is based, was incensed when producer Sam Spiegel changed the title from End as a Man to The Strange One, largely because Spiegel believed the word strange was a box office draw. He'd previously produced The Stranger in 1946 and We Were Strangers in 1949. Spiegel changed the ending, too. In Willingham's original story, Jocko suffers no comeuppance. The Academy essentially makes him into a man now fit to assume leadership in the outside world. But Spiegel wanted Jocko to face some kind of punishment, and he and director Jack Garfein concocted the climax in which his minions have finally had enough and turn on him. Willingham may have had issues with Spiegel, but it didn't stop the producer from hiring him to work on the script for his next film, The Bridge on the River Kwai. But director David Lean didn't like Willingham's style, and none of his work was used. For the rest of his life, Willingham divided his work between books and screenplays. His 1963 novel, The Eternal Fire, is his fiction masterpiece, and he also wrote or collaborated on the scripts for Paths of Glory, The Vikings, One-Eyed Jacks, The Graduate, Little Big Man, and Rambling Rose, which he adapted from his own novel. Jack Garfein was not so lucky in the film business. After his falling out with Spiegel, The Strange One was taken away from him. He had no input on the final cut or the score by Kenyon Hopkins. Garfein suspected that from then on, he was blackballed in Hollywood. The only other film he'd ever direct was a New York-centric feature made in 1961 called Something Wild, starring Ralph Meeker and Garfein's wife, Carol Baker. It's an exceptional film, which, like The Strange One, is highly theatrical and something of a borderline noir. The closest Garfein ever got to working in Hollywood was in 1966, when he co-founded the West Coast branch of the Actors Studio with a colleague from the New York School, Paul Newman. For a guy who only made 2 feature films in his career, Jack Garfein's life touched literally hundreds of talents who are staples of Turner Classic Movies, which in itself is something of a miracle. Garfein was a Ukrainian Jew living with his family in Czechoslovakia when they were all sent to extermination camps at the start of World War II. He was 11 years old when his entire family was murdered by the Nazis. Garfein somehow survived and eventually found his way to New York knowing only 6 words of English. He liked to tell a story about how after he became a theater director, he ran into another concentration camp survivor in New York. When the man asked what he was doing, Garfein complained that he'd just directed a play that had flopped horribly on Broadway. The man embraced him, tears in his eyes, and said, "Congratulations, you directed a play on Broadway." Jack Garfein knew a thing or two about perspective. That's why when colleagues asked if he was upset by his treatment at the hands of New York and Hollywood producers, Garfein would just smile and say, "I've dealt with worse." Jack Garfein died in 2019. July 2nd would have been his 92nd birthday. Cheers to Mr. Garfein. Not an extensive filmography, but an absolutely extraordinary life. Next week, Noir Alley returns to the sketchy confines of Poverty Row for the TCM premiere of another film rescued from oblivion by my Film Noir Foundation. Lee Tracy stars as, what else? A fast-talking, hard-bitten newspaper man in a 1947 obscurity from Monogram Pictures called High Tide. It features a classic setup. In the first scene, a speeding sedan crashes on a rocky shoreline, and in true noir fashion, the occupants recount the plot as the rising tide threatens to drown them. Have I hooked you? Then I'll see you back here next week. Same place, same time.